Welcome back to another episode of Trojan Dash. Hope everyone's doing well today. I know it looks a little bit different, right? Reagan's by himself. I'm going solo today. And we're going to start with some pretty big news in USC football, and that is Elijah Vera Tucker has decided to opt out if there is a season this upcoming year. Elijah Vera Tucker will not be participating due to COVID concerns. Obviously, this is something that we all knew could be happening, just considering how talented he is. He definitely has NFL aspirations. The dude could easily see his way into the second or even first round of next year's draft. It really doesn't make a whole lot of sense for him to participate in a season. So the theme of this episode today is going to kind of be NFL, right? Yesterday we saw the first game that, I wasn't even sure was going to happen. I wasn't sure we were going to have an NFL season, but lo and behold, they're having games in the NFL. So today we're going to be tying some USC into some NFL football today, starting with the topic, where could Elijah Vera Tucker go in the NFL? What team does it make sense for him to fit on? So, couple of options, right? In my mind, Elijah Vera Tucker, his greatest asset as a prospect is the fact that he's a swing guy. Not just, I say guy, not tackle or guard, is because the dude can play just about every spot on the offensive line. We haven't seen him play center, but I wouldn't put it past him. But we've seen him play guard, we've seen him play right tackle, and now he's going to be swung. He was going to be swung at least over to left tackle. And that's a valuable asset in the NFL, to have a guy who can go and play multiple positions. I think that I brought this up before on this show. Halapoulivaati Vaitai is a guy that played for the Philadelphia Eagles, my favorite team. Bring that out just for proof. And he stuck around for so long, not because he was so talented, right? The dude was a pretty good offensive lineman, nothing special. But the reason he stuck around the team for so long, he was on the team for that Super Bowl run, was because he could play so many different positions. He was a right tackle. He was a left tackle. They could swing him down to guard when they needed to. That's why he stuck around. And that gives you a lot of staying power in the NFL. So when you have a guy as talented as Vera Tucker is, and you can plug him in so many different places, that's why when I say he can be a first-round pick, that's what I'm talking about. That holds a lot of value. So what teams would he fit on? Teams that are building their offensive lines from the ground up. Teams that lack depth. Teams that are trying to lay the foundation for what's going to be a pretty good offensive line. So when we're thinking about teams that are starting from scratch in terms of their line, the first team that comes to my mind is the Arizona Cardinals, right? Last season, a lot of people speculated that they would go get an offensive lineman, whether it was Tristan Wirfs, whether it was Mekhi Becton. We thought they were going to be getting, surely, right, one of these offensive linemen, because they'd already traded for DeAndre Hopkins. Now all they need is an offensive lineman to protect Kyler Murray. But no, they go and get Isaiah Simmons, one of my favorite prospects in last year's draft, and they're going to try to shore up that defense, which leaves, Kyler Murray in almost a Russell Wilson-esque position in that he doesn't really have a whole lot of dudes protecting him. He's going to have to use his legs to extend plays a lot, right? And for this season, that might work. But Kyler Murray, as great as he is, I'm not sure if he's Russell Wilson good at extending plays and giving his wide receivers opportunity, even when he's not protected by the offensive line. So it would not surprise me at all to see that team go and start targeting offensive linemen in next year's draft. Vera Tucker seems like a very, very good fit, because he can play that left tackle position. He was going to play that left tackle position for USC this year. And B, because even if you feel like he can be a good temporary solution at left tackle, but not a permanent solution, you can easily draft him this year, use him at left tackle, and then when you do find that permanent solution at the left tackle position, you can swing him to right tackle, you can swing him to guard. It makes sense. Another team, and I just brought this team up, Seattle, right? Their offensive line has frankly never been good, not since Russell Wilson's gotten there. They do have Dwayne Brown. He's on the wrong side of 30. So I think it would make sense for them to start getting young pieces that they can try to build an offensive line to protect Russell Wilson as he gets older, as his legs start to go a little bit. It makes sense to try to build a better offensive line than he's had in years past, right? I think Vera Tucker would be a very solid building block for them to be able to do that. The Philadelphia Eagles, I mentioned how much Howie Roseman, the GM over there, values versatility and depth. It makes a whole lot of sense for them, even though they don't necessarily need an offensive lineman, right? They have Andre Dillard. They have Lane Johnson. They have a lot of solid pieces on the offensive line, but they value versatility and they value depth. But those are just a couple of the teams. Like I said, Vera Tucker is one dude that it made sense if there were going to be opt-outs, that he would be one of them. It remains to be seen what happens with a guy like Talanoa Hufanga, right? That's another dude who might have first-round aspirations come season's end. So it remains to be seen what happens with those guys, but he is the second opt-out besides Jay Tufele. it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out if there is a season, because we all saw how much talent this team had, right? But that talent might end up coming to bite them in the rear end come time for the season, just because some of those dudes might be opting out for the NFL draft. On this note of NFL players, right? I want to discuss who in the NFL, what USC Trojans in the NFL, that haven't maybe not necessarily performed up to par thus far, might have a breakout season. And excuse me for talking so much about the NFL, but if I'm going to talk about the show myself, it makes a little more sense for me to talk about the NFL, just because that's my area of expertise more so than college football. But the first dude that I have to bring up, Mr. Sam Darnold, man. Sam Darnold, anyone who watched USC football while Sam Darnold was here knows how talented that dude is. And he's been stuck into a very, very tricky situation, to say the least, up there in New York, and that he's frankly just not surrounded with a whole lot of talent. Granted, you have Le'Veon Bell. There are questions on whether or not Le'Veon Bell really even wants to be in New York. He might have just gotten his check and then looked around and said, okay, this is not the best franchise to be in, and deservedly so. Not a very good offensive line. They did start drafting. They drafted Mekhi Becton. He's going to be able to protect Sam Darnold's blind side. But outside of that, the offensive line is still pretty subpar. The defense isn't all that good. And when you look at his receivers, I'm not going to say his receiving core was better at USC than it currently is in New York. But I don't think he'd be mad if he just had the exact same receiving core that he had while he was here at USC and just planted that team in New York. Just because outside of Jameis and Crowder, there's not a whole lot of dudes. But I do want to bring up Denzel Mims, the wide receiver that just got drafted out of Baylor. I think that dude has star potential. If you watched, I don't know if you guys watch anything that I do, right? But I am a very, very huge fan of Denzel Mims. I think that dude, every year in each draft, you have one of those receivers that falls into the second round. Think about Devontae Adams. Think about Michael Thomas. That ends up becoming a star just because they're so physically gifted, because they know the nuances of route running, because they have the NFL skills that translate, right? I think that dude from this draft is going to be Denzel Mims. That dude has everything. When you talk about a catch radius, when you talk about speed, when you talk about strength, athleticism, verticality, hands, he's got it all. So when you take that into account, I think Sam Darnold, he's still not in the greatest situation that you could ask for as a quarterback, but I do think that he's in a better situation than he was last year. I think we could see a second-year leap from him, and especially, you're talking about a guy that, has immense talent. It just wasn't able to be displayed. You saw flashes of it last year, but you really didn't get to see it all come to fruition at really any point. I also want to bring up Ronald Jones, another dude. He actually played with Sam Darnold. Very, very talented running back. One of my favorite running backs in that draft class, and we really haven't seen his talent come to fruition as well once he hit the NFL, right? He even lost the job to Peyton Barber down there in Tampa Bay. And now, obviously, Bruce Arians, he's saying that even though they did bring in Leonard Fournette, they did bring in LaShawn McCoy, he's saying Ronald Jones is still our guy. Whether or not that's going to hold up over the entirety of the season, that remains to be seen. We all know how talented a guy like Leonard Fournette is. We all know how talented a guy like LaShawn McCoy was. But I'll take his word for it. If he says Ronald Jones is his guy, then Ronald Jones is probably his guy. So we'll go ahead and slot him in as the starting running back with a guy like Tom Brady, with a guy on the perimeters. Obviously, Mike Evans is injured right now, but you're going to have Mike Evans at some point this season. You're going to have Chris Godwin. You have Rob Gronkowski and O.J. Howard. You have a lot of talent around him, and that helps the running back, because what does that do? Well, if I'm a team and I'm a defense, right, and I'm looking at the greatest quarterback of all time opposite of me, I'm looking at one of the greatest deep threats, if not the greatest deep threat in the NFL, and Mike Evans on one side, and then a very, very good possession receiver and Chris Godwin on the other side, Rob Gronkowski coming down the seams, potentially O.J. Howard coming down the seams. Hell, I cannot load the box on these dudes. I need to spread it out a little bit. I'm probably going nickel. I'm probably going to have two linebackers. I'm going to make sure that I'm not getting killed by this passing game. And that opens up so much for the running backs. In this particular case, it opens it up for Ronald Jones. He gets the space to operate. He doesn't have a loaded box on him. And it makes a lot of sense for him to have a pretty good season. Another dude I want to bring up, Michael Pittman, right? And, maybe this is cheating a little bit because Michael Pittman hasn't been in the NFL yet. This is his rookie season, so it can't really be a breakout season if it is your first season. But I do think that he's primed to have a pretty good year. And given that, you have a quarterback who's kind of, taking a dip in his talent in Phillip Rivers as of late, but you still have some gas in the tank if you're Phillip Rivers. You have a rejuvenated T.Y. Hilton, right? He's on the outside. He's healthy again. That dude's going to be commanding double teams because we all know how talented he is as a deep threat. And because you command so much attention with T.Y. Hilton, that gives Michael Pittman something he hasn't had in a very long time, and that's a one-on-one matchup with the second-best corner on the team. Even if that's an NFL team, that could be a very good corner. I trust Michael Pittman in one-on-one matchups any day of the week. That dude is a physical nightmare for any corner in the NFL. 6'4", force 5 speed, quicker than you think, and those long strides eat up that space between him and the defensive back. So I think Michael Pittman could have a very good year, assuming that you have good quarterback play from Phillip Rivers. Not to mention the fact that you have Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack in the backfield, right? Those are two dudes that are going to force teams to load up the box. That's one of the best, if not the best, offensive lines in the NFL. Teams are probably going to load up the box a little bit on the Colts and have a little bit of extra coverage over T.Y. Hilton. That gives Michael Pittman a field day to work with, right? If he's doing one-on-ones, I trust him in slants. I trust him in go routes. I trust him in posts. That dude's going to be getting open this year. Last but not least, I talked about how I'm an Eagles fan, and this is a guy that I've had my qualms with in the past. Nelson Agholor. Any Eagles fan knows that we kind of have a love-hate relationship with Nelson Agholor. He's a guy who he's had the best of times and he's had the worst of times. The best of times being that 2017 Super Bowl run where he had made a lot of great plays, a lot of key plays that helped that team go win the Super Bowl. And the worst of times where you have potential game-winning passes from Carson Wentz that get dropped against Atlanta week 2 last year, potential game-winning passes. Nelson Agholor has never been the most sure-handed dude, at least not at the NFL level, but we've seen flashes of his greatness. And those flashes, for me, are enough to say, okay, I can recognize your potential. It's about whether or not you're able to put it together. Right now, Nelson Agholor is in Oakland, and I'm looking at the depth chart, and it actually surprised me that Nelson Agholor, he lost the slot receiver position. He lost that battle to Hunter Renfrow, right, the wide receiver out of Clemson. But I do see a world in which Nelson Agholor has a very good season, just because from a talent standpoint, this dude was a first-round pick for a reason. I want to say he was 20th overall, somewhere in there. He was somewhere in the 20s. That doesn't just happen out of the blue. And I'm not going to quite put the bust label on him, but he's shown bust potential, but he's also shown boom potential. And I'm going to bet on that boom more than I bet on the bust, especially when we're talking about the Las Vegas Raiders, man. Derek Carr, he had an underrated season last year. And it remains to be seen whether or not Gruden is going to be willing to stick with him long term. But I don't think that Derek Carr is a bad quarterback by any sense of the word. So you have a decent quarterback. You have a decent running game. He might be the best receiver on that team. When he's playing at his best, he might be the best receiver on that team. I don't know what the rapport looks like that he's built between him and Derek Carr, but if it's good enough to where he warrants significant targets, Nelson Agholor is a guy that I think could shock a lot of people. Maybe just put that in your back pocket for your fantasy team. Just keep tabs on what Nelson Agholor is doing, because trust me, as an Eagles fan, the dude has so much talent. He just really has yet to put it together, man. He's yet to put it together. I want to know your guys' thoughts, though. I want to know what you guys think about some other USC Trojans around the NFL that could have breakout seasons. Nickel Roby-Coleman's another guy that comes to mind. He had a very good season last year with Los Angeles. Now he's in Philly. He's going to be the starting nickel corner for Philly. They run a lot of nickel. They run more nickel than they do base. So I think that's a guy that's going to have a lot of time. And the last nickel corner that was really good in Philly was Patrick Robinson, and he was a key part of that Super Bowl run. So definitely keep eyes on Nickel Roby-Coleman. But yeah, man, I think there's a lot of Trojans that could have a decent impact around the NFL. I mean, that's what they do at USC, right? That's what we do. We groom NFL talent. That's why USC is one of the best teams, if not the best team in the Pac-12. But I kind of want to take a little bit of a shift here to end the show. And excuse me if this is a bit of an abbreviated show, just because, I'm not having somebody to bounce my ideas off of, whatnot. But I want to get this right, man. I want to get this right. I'm going to try to compose myself, because this is a topic that's very important to me. I feel as though it should be very important to us as a society. And I think it's vitally important to where we go in the future. Earlier this week, you had Dallas Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott in an interview with Graham Bessinger. He spoke about his mental state at the beginning of the pandemic. And, he talked about the things that a lot of us experience, right? It's a drastic change. We don't have the freedoms that we're used to. A lot of uncertainty. We're not surrounding ourselves with the people. We don't have access to people like we normally do. There's a feeling of isolation that came about with the pandemic and quarantine and all that. And his reaction to that, right? Dak's reaction to that is something that I feel like a lot of us shared, especially when we're talking about college student. I'm a sophomore in college. The youth really struggled through this pandemic just because it really cut off a lot of what we were used to doing. And it was a warranted response in my mind. It was a warranted response. It was an understandable response. But on Undisputed with Skip and Shannon, Skip Bayless had the opinion that Dak Prescott, as the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, as the leader of the Dallas Cowboys, as the face of America's team, that he should have done more to kind of swallow those mental not mental shortages, but just kind of the turmoil that he was going through. Because in Skip's mind, as the quarterback of America's team, it's important that you kind of always put on a brave face. And that's something that I wholeheartedly disagree with. And I thought about it. And there were a lot of people bashing Skip on social media, Twitter, television, a lot of people bashing him. And I thought about it, and it feels like it's less of a product of who Skip is and more of a product of the time that he comes from. People of Skip's generation, they didn't generally attack mental health issues head on. It was more of an internalization of things, swallowing it, pushing forward, trying to persevere. That's how they, embodied strength in their minds. That was what it meant to be a strong person, the ability to take hardship and keep moving forward. But that definition of strength, it's evolved over time. And now that I'm looking at the people in my generation and how we view what it means to be strong, it's a little bit more inclined to the willingness to be able to express yourself and do exactly what Dak did and say, I am going through these things. I did have this inner turmoil, and I did struggle. And to me, that's something that's extremely important for a guy like Dak Prescott to do, because it shows how far we've come in terms of having these discussions of mental health. And it shows that stigma is kind of eroding away. But what we can't do as people in our society, and specifically as journalists, right? As people who talk about these athletes, as people who have a platform to speak about these things, what we can't do is perpetuate some of the same things that we've seen in the past, the ideologies that Skip Bayless represents. So I want to issue a challenge to myself. I want to issue a challenge to my fellow Dash co-hosts, to the future of sports media in general. And that challenge is to, as we cover these athletes, whether at the collegiate level, at the professional level, at the high school level, as we cover athletes in general, and these topics of mental health, and even when it's not even mental health, when we're talking about a bad game, a bad series, let's be a little bit more cognizant of how the things we are saying affect the people that we're talking about. Because one of the golden rules of journalism, right? When we talk about journalistic ethics, one of the things that we're not supposed to do is cause harm. And this isn't to say that we're not allowed to criticize, that we're not allowed to judge, that we're not allowed to, see what's going on and give our opinions on it. But far too often, man, far too often when I observe people, there's little to no empathy. People are so quick to talk about an athlete, to talk about a person, whether, this isn't just sports media. This is media in general. Far too often when we talk about a person, we lack a level of empathy that I think is warranted, man. There's ways to criticize a draft prospect without saying that he sucks. There's ways to criticize a person's game without saying that they look like they didn't want to be out there. You know what I mean? There's ways to go about doing these things that don't cause harm to the people that we're talking about, because ultimately, man, each and every one of us, we go through things. We have inner fears and struggles. And because of those things, I would hope that we as the future, we do a bit better job of taking those things into account when we're covering the people that we cover. Compassion, man. That's important. It's more important than ever before. With that said, I think I'm going to end it here. Like I said, it's going to be a bit of an abbreviated episode. No Nathan today, but hope you guys enjoy. Make sure you go check out the social media. That's at Dash Sports TV on Instagram and Twitter. And make sure you go check out the website for the condensed clips, dashsports.tv. Make sure you go do all of that. Stay tuned. We're coming at you every single week with this, man. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.